Introduced me to Laurie Taylor, you know, and so they said, oh, I think he was over there. And then he said, oh, he's gone. I went, damn, I want to talk to Laurie Taylor because we're listening to him.
I'm a terrible person to meet for half time.
Forever, yes, exactly, yeah. 45 minutes an hour is you know, or basically, it's like CDs, and everything's too long these days.
Yeah.
I never stayed for the Saints Go Marching In, which was always the or the audience or whatever.
Yeah. I find, you know, you can only absorb so much and you get enough off.
But you were always too young for that sort of trad scene.
I was too young for that trad scene.
That was ridiculous. Ridiculous scene, that was.
You weren't at 1954 at the riot at Bewley, were you, or anything like that?
No, but I was at the Empire Liverpool when Hunt put a saxophone in.
Oh, and you went for Go Home Filthy Bopper, Bruce Turner.
That's right, they go, saxophones! Kind of a saxophone.
Everybody was very passionate in those days. It's like when Bob Dylan turned up, somebody screamed out Judas.
That was absolutely terrible.
Electric bands, you know. People were very, very intense. It was quite narrow. Ken Collier, people like that.
No, Ken Collier was absolutely bloody strict, you know, absolutely. So, you know, you couldn't play it, absolutely had to be done perfectly. I mean, it was like going to a high-crowd lecture. Really.
Yeah.
You know, if you clapped, you always looked a bit disconcerted, as though, you know.
So absolutely right. So you started with the trad, really? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Usually Humphrey Lyttelton. I did like Humphrey Lyttelton first. And some of those. That was the early things. We used to listen to the radio. Anything that was on the radio that was even remotely, you know, concerned or connected with jazz. Occasionally, they'd have big bands on, like Eric Winston and Lou Prager and Joe Loss and people like that. And occasionally they say, we're now going to have a little jazz session. And then they do a 4-minute thing, you know, they do something like, you know, License Blues or something like that, something, you know, pretty thing.
Yeah,
yes, that's right, Francis Newton. Very anodyne name. Eric Osborne and Francis.
There could be usually another Philip Larkin as well.
I think
he drew the line, I think. He drew the line about that.
Well, you know, it's a sustainable point of view, actually. The thing I now appreciate about Ken Collier, not just in the music, the idea that there are no soloists. You're all in it together, weaving. And that's rather beautifully common. You know, because the cult of the individual soloist is extremely bourgeois individualistic. It is, isn't it? It is. Mingus was very communal. Yes, he carried on the communal thing. But when you think about the classic jazz performer, which is 3 people sort of shutting up and one bloke going on and on and on, and then him going away and then somebody else going on.
Chad never had solos. I mean, any solo person I ever saw was probably on even an interval with Chris Barber, because, you know, Chris Barber would fuck on. And, you know, they just leave Bobby on the stage and he'd play, you know, what he played, My Old Man Joe.
I mean, I think for Ken Collier,
Skiffle.
Probably for Ken Collier, even Louis Armstrong was a bit, because that was the beginning of the cult of the soloists, you know. And so I should imagine for Ken, and I really... I was not totally
but I love it. I'm the Isle of Capri, and I love the record, the Isle of Capri. And you play that little record. You know the little parlophone records, you have to sit in your little parlour and you play them over and over again. Because now I look at my...
Tell young people, so you play your one record over and over again, it goes in, completely goes in, every inflection on that record.
Every single... The other person, of course, I remember tremendously well, as I've told you the story before, was Joe Harriott.
Oh yeah, Joe Harriott, yes.
I lived with him for a time.
Yes.
He was down. He came to live with me. I mean, he was completely down on his luck. I don't know. I always think he probably didn't play. I don't know. He got thrown out. He couldn't do anything in London. I think probably the musicians' union would run him. You know, it was dues or something. He can't run. And he was in a terrible state. There was some huge growth on his big growth on his back. He still played wonderfully. He played, you know, he used to go out into the Yorkshire moors and through snow and fizzle and God knows how he'd turn up at some out of the way bloody steak and chips place in the middle of the Yorkshire moors and play his heart out. And then get out of the car on the way up and be sick, you know, and cut off he was so burnt out. He was a lovely man. And that was, I used to listen to all of that stuff.
Right, he was a great player.
abstracts and freeforms still sound contemporary today. Like, you put them on, they sound like it could have been done.
I believe they recorded in the 50s.
Yeah.
That's 50s.
Yeah.
So he was apparently he was doing contemporaneously with one and Common.
No, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't an influence, it was the same time.
No, it's just I still listen to those. I still listen. And of course the bass player, he was saved because of course he got into a little group called Ray Ellington. And they were in the middle of the Goon Show. Everybody loved the Goon Show, but it was huge. It didn't wear very well. But the interval thing was always played by the Ray Ellington Trio.
I think the Goon Show wears pretty well. I love Radio 4 Extra.
With Coleridge Good on bass.
With Coleridge Good on bass, yeah. And he only died recently, 101 or something.
Oh.
And he used to play right up to about 96. Played something with him at quite.
Did you?
Yeah, no, about 10 years ago. And he turned up with, there was a guy who used to set everything up for him.
Yeah.
And he'd sit there and play, and, very well. And he was a pioneer of electric bass. He pioneered amplifying the bass, and he also played on some Django Reinhardt.
Did he?
Yeah. He was a mate of Michael Garrett's.
Yeah.
That's how I knew. But,
It's funny how you missed out. I was remembering when I was brought up in Liverpool. We always used to go. This was the days of the Beatles, and people would say, "Do you want to come down the cabin and see the Beatles?" Like, no, we're going to the Temple to see the Mississippi. The Mississippi Jazz Band, which had on trombone a guy called Frank Parr, who was Lancashire's reserve wicketkeeper.
yes, I remember the name.
He'd come with a great big bag, which, he'd have his bat, and couldn't stop his gloves and so on, and his trombone.
But hang on, Rory, did you see the Beatles at the cabin?
Yes, I did, yes. But of course I didn't go back very much,
No, but I mean,
Beatles, plug of the Beatles.
I've
got the verses.
What was it like? Was it?
But you see, there's so much. I mean, there were only three places, only three music venues in Liverpool. There was the Cavern, and the Temple, and there's the Picton Hall. And the Picton Hall was Mick Mulligan and Humphrey and Freddie Randall and the Crane River Jazz Band, the Saints Jazz Band, and Lonnie Donegan. That was that. That was fine. That was okay. But really, I mean, to be live down at the Temple, which was a great place to see the Mississippi, which had two trumpeters, and everything.
So that was really what you were into.
And then all of a sudden, then one day, somebody took me home and played me some. I remember they played me Oscar Peterson playing Tenderly. My mate said, "Listen to this story." He said, "This is different." So I said, "Oh, well, somebody just waiting for him to play." That was it.
We're jumping ahead a bit, but I got to know Clapton a bit. And Hendrix.
But there's the university between all
yes,
so what do
you all of us. Okay, I'll tell you exactly what happened.
Can you go off to do history of art?
I'll tell you what happened, Laurie. I'm trying to encapsulate all this. So Hank Marvin finished, then Django Reinhardt came on in the form of the rhythm guitarist, the Bruce Welch, if anybody knows the Shadows, the Bruce Welch of our band. His father was a guitarist, a bit like my father was a pianist, an amateur guitarist. In fact, his father was in MI5, But when he was off from Spine, he was playing rhythm guitar, and he played us some Django Reinhardt records. So I got totally involved with Django Reinhardt then, and me and my friend would play Django tunes. And then, so I then left my boarding school, in a sort of cloud of opprobrium, which is as you should, How can one look oneself in the mirror now unless you were actually expelled from your school? And so I went up to London to get my A-levels, and there I was witness to people like Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix when they first appeared, and marginally got to know them. In fact, Jimi Hendrix sort of saw us playing with our little band. He was very nice to me, very complimentary. And so that all made me think more and more that I want to do this. But perversely, because I'm a dutiful son, I went to university to please my parents. So in 1967, at the point where the rest of the band was saying, "Oh, we should go professional, I went, "No, I'm going to university." So I went off to university.
The history of art?
That was luck, Laurie. What happened was, there was a common first year at Essex University. You did sociology, politics, literature and history of art. And the history of art department just started. So I thought this will be a cushy option. They'll probably be awarding decent degrees. And there weren't many people in the department. And sure enough, I joined the department, there were 4 people. And the tutors were great. Dawn Addis, who's the great surrealist expert, Joseph Rickworth, architecture, we had Anthony Blunt a bit. There was only 4 of us. And so, but most of the time I played the guitar with the band. We had formed a band and played guitar. And within a year, I was, I thought, well, I'm going to go and be a musician. But, funnily enough, I failed my first year exams. I remember going to see the tutor, and I said, I don't want to do this, I want to be a musician. He said, well, do you want to try your resits? And I went, yeah, okay. So I finished, and I got a degree, 2-1 in art history.
Did you start to think that that's what when you were there, you thought, when I graduate, I'm going to be a musician?
Yes.
You got that settled?
Yeah, pretty well settled. I was going to give it a go, but I was also reasonably au fait with the idea of perhaps I'd work in a museum or something, or curate something as an art historian. I quite fancied the idea of being an art historian and a musician. But I arrived in London and immediately started working, so
Let's talk about people who encourage you. You mentioned before about Jimi Hendrix. What did he say to you? I mean, what sort of encouragement?
Well, he was both those guys were just, I mean, they're not that much older, you know. As age gaps, as you get older, I mean, Clapton's only 3 years older than me, and Hendrix was 5 years older than me, but of course I was 17 and they were 20, 21, 22. And so they were like big brothers, and I met Clapton by accident in Notting Hill, and then I kept seeing him in the same place, and the drummer in our band was quite a pushy guy, and he got to know him really well. So he came and sat in with us and played, and he was very complimentary to me because I was trying to do something a bit different from just copying him, which most people were doing, and I had this sort of jazz influence in my playing as well as the kind of blues thing. So it was what you might call early jazz rock, you know. And he was quite taken with that, and he liked me. And then this our own bushy drummer again got us on. He was down the Speakeasy, hanging out. Somehow he got there, and Hendrix was there, and there was a band playing. And he said to Hendrix, he might have said Hendrix, he said, "Jimmy, mate, this band's rubbish. Our band's fantastic. You should hear us." And Jimmy went, "All right, man. Okay." So we went and had a word with the manager. The manager said, "Okay, you can play half an hour on Sunday." So we went and played half an hour on Sunday with Hendrix and Clapton and all these people there, and he was very nice to me. He came over, you know, sort of, you know, I was sitting in the corner minding my own business. He actually came over and said, "That was great, man. That was great," you know. So I was like, wow. Although, of course, he wasn't a mythical god. He was just.
Well, I mean, so that you wanted to be. You wanted to be what Clapton was then at that time. I mean, you wanted.
I didn't want to play like him, no, because.
You didn't want to be a rock musician.
No, I did for a moment, and then everything happened with John McLaughlin's Extrapolation and Miles Davis in the Silent Way, 2 records that came out around '69 that completely turned me back into the sort of jazz one.
What was it about In a Silent Way?
It's just so atmospheric. You see, the issue I had with sort of, you might say, early 60s, mid-60s jazz, so much of it, like the Miles Davis album, it didn't really have kind of atmosphere and texture. They were about intellectual lines and things. I mean, encapsulating, you know, they were about lines and they seemed intellectual to me. Whereas In a Silent Way, particularly, had such a feeling, a sort of the movement of the harmonies inside, which aren't really harmonies. It's all like a sort of tapestry, like a jungle of sound, and you get a little bit of John McLaughlin snaking in, and you get a bit of Wayne Shortling. Completely captivating. And a fantastic example of somebody who sees their career going down the swanny, Miles Davis. So he's got a commercial imperative, but because he's Miles Davis, he comes up with something that is also extremely original and fresh and creative, with the intention of being commercially successful. So, you know.
Then you see these names. When I read about what's happened to your life, there always seem to be people who suddenly appear, like Stephane Grappelli. You know.
Yeah, they do appear.
Where do they come from?
Well, I don't know. You see, that was the amazing thing. I came to London, you know, and
so you left Essex.
Yeah, I left Essex. Finished my thing. I arrived in London, started doing gigs, and in those days you used to answer adverts on the back of the Melody Maker. You get the Melody Maker on Thursday. In the back would be adverts. Musicians Wanted, it's called, and there'd be a little box if it was a decent band, they'd pay for a box. It said, lead guitarist wanted, must travel, must be good, we will be very cruel to time wasters. And then they leave a number. So you phone up the number, and you get someone, mate, yeah, well, the audition's at the White Horse pub, in the room at the back, 11:30 on Thursday. You turn up, and there'll be a line of guitar players. Now, by 1970, everybody had heard the Eric Clapton thing. Everybody knew it. People still liked it, but it was very common. So you get 19 guitarists all going, see, lovely, beautiful. Each one with perhaps a slightly better sound than last one, but basically in the same area. And I get up and do my little sort of jazz rock thing. And after 19 of Clapton guitars, they go, oh, wow. It was necessarily better, it was just different. So I got a lot of work straight off, right? And then my first break was joining a guy called Darryl Way, violinist, who was from Curved Air. Same thing, audition, Melody Maker audition, went along, and I did my thing, and he went, well, you like your playing, but I don't like your image. So I said, okay, what do you want? He said, well, you have to buy some clothes, you know. He said, you'll have to look, you'll have to look the part. Anyway, this was a band that got a pretty big advance from Decca, and we did 3 albums, and that sort of put me on the map.
It was big on the student scene, wasn't it? I remember it was in New York.
Yes.
Huge round the block.
Yeah. And so we did quite a few albums, and the guy in the Melody Maker, Chris Welch, who was the big journalist at the time, took a fancy to me, and he started writing extravagant reviews, which at the time did my head in, because I thought, I'm not worthy, this is an odd thing when, somebody starts picking you up in print, you go, no, there are millions of guys better than me, but it did me a lot of good, because I played, and then Alan Holdsworth, who was in the Soft Machine, there again, you've got to remember, well, you don't have to remember Laurie, but I mean, anybody young, under the age of 40, listening to this, realised that actually to hear people then was quite difficult.
Yeah.
You'd hear about somebody, but you might have to go and buy a record. You want to actually invest in a record. I mean, I often used to go and invest in a record from a rave review in the Melody Maker and then play it and go, I don't think much of that. But you couldn't just sort of dial it up and have a listen. So I don't know if Alan Holdsworth knew my playing, so he probably read about it in the Melody Maker, and he was leaving the Soft Machine. And I happened to be, well, my trick at the time was, Darryl Way's Wolf had folded up. And what I used to do, I used to hang around in my flat and I'd practice. And then I'd go down to the guitar shop, take the guitar off the wall, sit in the corner, burning away, kind of hoping that somebody would give me a gig. Anyway, one day I was in there, and I wasn't doing this, I just happened to be there, and Alan Holdsworth, who was one of the great jazz rock guitarists, he was on the point of leaving the Soft Machine, and he said, well, what are you doing, man? And I said, oh, nothing. He went, oh. So he took my number, and they called me. No, you see, more strange than this. I was playing with a man called the Global Village Trucking Company. Name mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Well, they were a totally hippie band, right?
Yeah.
Global Village Trucking Company. So, and I sort of, I mean, one of the thing I've pride myself, I don't know, but I feel like I sort of fit in with who I'm playing with to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And the Global Village Trucking Company was a very easygoing, kind of Grateful Dead kind of hippie band. And I was playing sort of quite mildly. Anyway, we played in Swindon, and when I came off the road, he said, oh, the Soft Machine guys were here. I went, oh no! Oh, that's blown it. God. And apparently John Marshall said, well, he can't play. And Carl Jenkins said, no, I think he can. So I phoned them up a few days later and phoned the manager, and he said, oh, you want to do? I said, yeah, I want to do an audition. So then I went down to room behind a pub and did a proper audition and played properly, and they were okay, and so I joined that. this is getting on for the Stephane Grappelli thing. So then, Soft Machine I was in for a few years.
So you once said you didn't ever make any money out of Soft Machine.
No,
you never knew where the money went.
Well, I was on a wage for a bit, and then they made me a director, and John Marshall said, you shouldn't do that, you'd be worse off, because I was really proud to be a director. You know, you're a director of the Soft Machine, which meant I got no money. Neither did anybody else. But anyway, so we got no money from the Soft Machine. Anyway, so you say how this Stephane Grappelli thing came up. Soft Machine did a TV thing from Newcastle. Interestingly enough, introduced by Spike Milligan, who said, Soft Machine, yes. A friend of mine said, I can't wait to see this band, so we left. Soft Machine, they filmed the Albert Hall, they left a tap running in the dressing room. Anyway, so we did this TV show, and it just happened that Dizzie, who was Stephane Grappelli's guitarist, was walking along the road and bumped into somebody, a guy called Pete Shade, who thank you, Pete. And Dizzie said, I'm looking for a young guitar player. And Pete Shade said, well, I just saw this guy on the television last night, you know. Of course, it's nothing to do with Stephane Grappelli, nothing to do with it. But luckily, Pete said he didn't go, completely the wrong idiot. But he said, oh, yeah, you know, so I suddenly got this call from Dizzie, this sort of Yorkshire voice. Hopefully nobody minds me doing a Yorkshire voice. I was just getting character, you know, hello, it's Dizzie here. I went, what? He said, no, it's just Dizzie, we're looking for a guitar player. I said, well, what's happened to Ike Isaacs? He said, oh, no, too many bald heads on the stage. We're looking for somebody young. And he turned up without a guitar, and we played half of the chorus of Sweet Georgia Brown. He went, oh, that'll do, Steph likes you, you know. So, I mean, there's long stories here, I won't go into them all, but we went to Hamburg, we did a TV show, and Steph said, I like him, he's a nice boy, you know. And
what's your first meeting with Steph?
Because I went with Diz and the bass player in a car to Hamburg, December, freezing cold. And it was a TV show, 5 tunes, and I sat in my room, no sign of Stephane Grappelli, we arrived about 3 days earlier. Sat in my room and Diz said, well, we knock on the door. John, we've got to get you some clothes, you know, again. My clothes are never quite the required. So we went down, we bought a bright red shirt, and he said, you've got to have a dangler, and he bought me this sort of horrible pendant that I had to wear. He said, go to your room and wait there. So I sat in my room and waited for another day with my shirt on and everything. Finally, come next door, right? So I went next door, and there was the bass player, Phil, who we'd driven with. Diz went, I'm going to get him now, he's arrived. So we come up, and then the door opens, in comes Stephane Grappelli, you know. And you know, those first impressions of anybody, so the first thing is he had a sort of permanent Gallic drizzle, right? So he'd be carrying his violin, mouth turned down like sort of Mr. Mean in the, oh, I'm fed up to be here, it's so cold, oh, he'd start putting his violin to start opening the bow, and started doing this with the bow, you know, rosining the bow, oh, and he never looked at me. And I have a feeling, years later, you look back at an incident, I think Diz didn't say he got rid of Ike Isaacs until just before. Oh, by the way, we've got a new young guitar player. You see, because he wouldn't look at me. So I said, well, then he just spoke to Diz and he said, hello, Diz, ask him, does he know them their eyes? You see, and then Diz would turn to me and go, do you know them their eyes, John? And I go, yes, I think so. And we talk about 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, right. And then he stopped, and without looking at me, he said, what is that horrible chord? So Diz told me, what's that horrible chord, John? I said, oh, I think that was a chord that... you would never play that horrible chord. Alors, G, A7. So we got through that. Rock. Next tune, he goes, we play Manoir de mes rêves. You see, alors Diz, tell him to accompany me. So, John, will you accompany Stephane on this? He says, okay. I go plink, plink. Oh, no! Oh, Diz, you do it. By which time I'm thinking, well, this was an amusing little interlude. My audition with Stephane Grappelli. So we did that. And then he said, no, baby. He used to go like this. No, You are the sunshine of my life. See Stevie Wonder. This is 1976. So, and I thought, I know this tune, you know, and I do actually, this is a tune I know, and I probably know it better than them. So we started playing, and I knew all the right chords, and I said to Diz, you know, and then he motioned to me, finally looked at me, he motioned to me to do a solo. So I threw in everything I could in my sort of 16 bars. So finally we finished, and he turns to me and goes, hello, baby. He looked at me finally and went, oh, I like what you do there. I like that business, that fast business. It's very good. It amused the tourists.
You're sitting next to me, you must have been aware you're something of Django.
Well, in a way.
From 1950s and 60s, 70s, this was the very, not the very beginning of his revival, but he was really, his revival started in early 70s, and it was Diz, actually, credit to Diz Disley, who got him playing with the guitars again, and that immediately connected everybody with Django, and that's what they wanted to hear, because before that he played with piano, bass and drums. He'd come and play at Ronnie Scott's 2 weeks a year, and piano, bass and drums, marvellous playing, but nobody was really that interested.
There's also something, I remember hearing the story, I think it was from, it would have been Nigel Kennedy talking about when he was at the Yehudi Menuhin, and Stephane came and immediately took him in and rolled a joint and lit up.
Pretty well, yes, exactly.
And Yehudi Menuhin was the austere, you know, we must be very careful about this purity and everything like that. And he said, you know, Stephane wandered in like a
yes, Nigel loved that. I mean, he was very much, that was a really seminal moment for Nigel, the whole Stephane Grappelli coming to Yehudi Menuhin.
Because there's a sort of relaxation, and Grappelli wasn't a relaxed person, but he was totally relaxed. He was very anxious, because of his background as an orphan and living on the streets of Paris. He was a real sort of ducker and diver. When as soon as he picked up the violin, he was totally relaxed, very serious but not solemn, you know, not self-regarding at all musically. He just played really beautifully, had an innate sense of beauty and poise and balance, and he put the violin down and then go and eat. So there were no post-mortems, there was no heads down, oh I played terrible, oh my God, you know. It was all incredibly relaxed.
You were talking about him being sort of itinerant musician, this stage in his life. And in a way, I mean, you've always been a bit, I mean, after Soft Machine, I don't think did you regularly play with any other...
Well, after Stephane Grappelli, that finished in about 81, then there was a real itinerant period, yes.
Yeah, but you like that? I mean...
Yes and no. People say, oh, you like that, obviously, but really through the 80s, which was a very difficult period for people of my generation, because suddenly everything changed. So I only really knew, because I'd been with Grappelli, I was accepted into the jazz world. So I must say, in 81, 82 early, I was fortunate enough to be offered a lot of teaching things. I'm fortunate not just financially, but because I quickly learnt. I'd been playing more or less by ear, really. And I really learnt my jazz theory in the early 80s, so I could keep up with the students. And then I started playing with all these people like Michael Garrick.
But you said that the 80s were an appalling time. I remember reading an
yes.
interview with you.
Yeah.
What was appalling?
Well, I found the 80s. It's really odd. Everything came together for me. It was like that awful music, most of it, you know, the awful pop music, with sort of, you know, Ultravox and all that, which was, now I listen to it and I think, well, at least it's original. You know, it wasn't original. But they had despised the hippies, us, totally. There was the politics, you know, the Thatcher era. It was all like, every time I switched on the radio, it was like, oh, God, really? And then my personal life was in sort of total meltdown, crisis. It all seemed to come together, but luckily I sort of kept going. I just kept going through, and one of the facets was this playing with, not really having a sense of direction, just playing with everybody who asked me.
But you play with everybody now, don't you?
I do seem to play with quite a lot of people now. I know, well I think I just sort of, I don't know, some people go, right, I know people who go, I'm only going to play when it's exactly right, when the conditions suit me exactly, and then I'm going to play. But basically, certainly up until, really, if somebody phones me up and says, let's do something, I go, all right. But usually, for the last 10, 15 years, I've been quite passive. And I wait for somebody to ask me, say, like we were talking about when I played here as a duo with Aaron Gosh, improvising. I just said to him, I saw him, socially, we were playing with Chez Rogers together, and I said, I just saw a great improvising trio, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Tim Motzer, and the drummer. He said, we could do that. And I went, all right. So he fixed it up at the Vortex, and we did it. So yes, I do like that.
You missed the camaraderie of a regular group of people to be with.
But I like the regular soft machine. That's what I really love. That's what I really love, the regular thing. I love it. Yeah. So I am slightly peripatetic, but in my nature, I also like a regular, and I've formed a lot of long-term associations, I've noticed. Yeah. You only notice things about yourself, don't you, when somebody points them out to you. I mean, like, say with John Williams, I've been associated for 20 years. 20 years we've been doing things. Although he's now pretty well retired. Nigel Kennedy, that was quite long. I mean, it wasn't that regular, but it was quite long. I sort of, must be some others, my brain's gone. But these associations seem to, there was Bertice Redding. I mean, for instance, that was, looking back on the face of it, a very odd thing, but do you remember Bertice Redding?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So I sort of worked with her, and then we sort of, there again, that was the 80s, where I was a bit of a lost soul. I think because she was sort of, she was almost like a family, so I sort of worked with her, even though I wasn't that into the
Somebody was just talking about when you were into classical music.
Yeah.
You play classical music with John Williams sometimes. Sort of.
Ish. Sort of. Yeah.
Somebody once said about you that your greatest particular gift was knowing what to leave out, not to...
well, that's nice.
I was just reading up on you, and someone said...
That's nice.
Knows what to leave out.
Well, I think that goes back to the Global Village Trucking Company. It's a bit like... See, when I play with the soft machine, when I play in different contexts, I find I play completely differently, and it's not like a conscious thing. When I play with the soft machine, I really like the playing with the soft machine because I go back to how I played in the 70s sometimes, which I almost left behind after that. And then, it's in that sense, I know what's meant, because, the classic jazz person has a style, which is fixed, and they bring it to every context. And of course, that's in a way what the jazz fans like. They like somebody, he plays like that, he always plays like that. I mean, in our area, the guitarists like Pat Metheny, for instance, not that well known, but he's a classic case where from day one,
Pat Metheny always sounded exactly like Pat Metheny in every context. And I don't do that. B, I would think that must be a little bit boring.
Well, you said with a nice phrase you used once, I like to be appropriate.
Yes, exactly. I mean, well, exactly. So in the soft machine, or the Frank Zappa thing, the Zappatistas that I do, occasionally, about once a year we do it, that was came around by a commission. But the appropriate thing is there. If you listen to Frank Zappa, there's these endless guitar solos, so it's marvellous. I feel it's absolutely appropriate to do an endless guitar solo. But if I was playing with somebody else, I wouldn't feel that, okay, now's my time to... 20 minutes later, song comes back. But of course I've worked with a lot of musicians. I mean, Dick Hextall-Smith was a big friend of mine. And I loved Dick Hextall-Smith. Do you remember Dick Hextall-Smith?
Yeah.
I loved Dick. I loved him, but he was absolutely antithetical. He'd been at Dartington College, Dartington School, where you're taught to just do what you want. So we do these tunes, he'd play a long soprano solo, 90-bit solo, then he'd play a long tenor solo. I said, Dick, this is really kind of overdoing the structure of the piece. It doesn't really, it doesn't really work. He said, yes, but I want to. And his motto was Alistair Crowley, let I want be the whole of the law. And he was a marvellous man. I really loved him, and I loved working with him, but he just had this completely different approach. It wasn't like, I'm not talking about being self-effacing necessarily, but it's like, you feel the other musicians and you feel the atmosphere.
There's a story about Miles Davis and Coltrane, isn't there? Something about
Coltrane
going on.
Yes, that's right.
Take the horn out of your mouth.
Yes, exactly. Well, Dick wouldn't he'd just go on and on and on if he felt like it. If he didn't feel like it, he'd play for 2 minutes and you go, well, Dick, the tune's finished. Yes, but I only wanted to.
Is it something about, I mean, it's a slightly odd question, but I mean, it's almost as though you've ducked out of places where you could have gone on, made a great deal of money, you could have been, quote, famous, more famous than you are. I mean,
Yes.
Did you ever think about that? Was there a moment when you thought, if I go in this direction, yeah, well, you know...
No, I'll tell you why. I mean, I do think about that. And I've been sort of accused of that. Oh, you could have been, you know, what happened, you know. And there are two things. First of all, I had this obsession with kind of knowledge, virtuosity, wanting to be the best possible on the instrument. Now that is actually militates against you know, thinking about where the main chance is. Secondly, I always wanted to play in different contexts. I didn't actually necessarily want to. I was happy with the soft machine, but when I got offered the job with Stephane Grappelli, it was like, well, I've got to do that. Even if I don't feel I'm the right guy, I've got to do it.
A bit like that with John. I mean, John Williams approached me. I thought, I can't play with you. You're John Williams. You know, you're the world's greatest classical guitarist. What am I going to do with you? But instead of going, oh, I don't think I can do it, I sort of went, oh, I'll push through my anxiety and do it. And so I think that back to the point that we had before, where I think in order to be, certainly in the jazz world, to be really successful, you've got to have a sort of way of playing. And I understand that. I mean, with McCoy Tyner, who I used to adore in the 80s, I just would go mad listening to McCoy Tyner. He suddenly changed his way of playing and started playing like Art Tatum. And I was devastated. So I can quite understand if somebody sees me playing in a certain way, and then they come to the next gig, and I mean, I don't put hats on, but I'm playing in a different context. They go, well, who is this bloke? What's he about? And so I quite get that.
Because you always evaded that rock star personality thing. I think I mostly saw it when the time that I saw you with Nigel Kennedy up in the Scar.
Oh, yes, that one.
The Scar.
Yeah.
And the contrast, as it were, between you and him, I mean, he was lording it around.
Yes.
I think in the second half, I mean, the first half was a wonderful half. That was the most,
wasn't it?
That
acoustic.
was wonderful.
Yes.
The second one, you know, we were doing the Hendrix stuff, you know, and the Scarborough audience, mostly, I mean, they're all over 60.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, they've grown up with Humphrey Little.
Yes, exactly.
Here they were
like,
confronted.
So, you know, something like Nigel is not like that conscious. He knows he's doing it, but it's something inside him that really needs to do that. Whereas my need seems to be to get on with people and sort of be part of them, even though, you know, the paradox, I'm supposedly a kind of individual, jazz is an individualist music, and I seem to play with lots of people. I want to be part of it.
It's just people you come across. I mean, let's go on to Birelli for a moment. I mean, because I suppose I associate you because I came to you quite late on.
Yeah.
I remember the band you played, I remember Soft Machine at the University of New York and everything. I don't know if you were there or not. But Birelli, I mean, you just met.
We did. We met on Hampstead Heath. And we had a little chat. I think how it happened was that she said she'd spoken to me before. Now, me having a memory, you know, even though this is 8 years ago, it's even worse now. But I must have remembered that because I stopped to talk to her, and we had a chat, and you know, we talked about this and that, and music and stuff. And then she came to a solo gig of mine at the Pheasant Tree in the King's Road. So she phoned me up and said, I'm going to come with some friends. So I said, all right, but, you know, what about singing, you see? And that was partly because I thought all these friends would be sitting there judging, you know, it'd be nice, always when I do solo concerts, I used to do loads of them, I'd always find midway through the second set, despite all my efforts to be various and diverse and variegated, or whatever you want to call it, something needed to happen in the middle of the second set. And quite often I myself would lapse into singing. In fact, just before we get into the Vim thing, I've got a really funny story. I was at Halesworth in Suffolk. There was an art centre there called The Cut. So I used to do quite a lot of solo gigs there. I'd done a solo gig. I was sitting in the foyer. This is the next solo gig. The phone goes, and John, are you going to be singing tonight? And I said, oh, probably not. He said, probably not. Put the phone down. He said, this woman phoned up. She said, I'd like to come, but if he's going to sing, he ruined it last time by singing, I'm not coming. Anyway, so I said to Vic, right, okay, I'd really like, you don't have to, I'm not putting you on the spot or anything, because she hadn't done anything for a long time.
You've heard her, haven't you, already?
No, I haven't. No? Actually, I think we must have had a little bit of a rehearsal. That's right, she came round and we had a little sing. And anyway, so I said, if you feel like it, go up to the second set. I'll look at you, and you can just... So halfway through the second set, I looked at her and she went... So I said, all right, I'd like to introduce this singer. And she got up and just sang this amazing... We did Detour Ahead and Malika, I think. It was just astonishing, I'm just going, what? Who is this? Because there weren't many people there. And everybody was going, wow. And I thought, did I imagine this? Or is this really wow? And then, the next thing we did was much later, was on Hampstead Heath. And I booked her, because I do a gig every year on Hampstead Heath, and I thought, well, I'll get Vim on. And I was still thinking, well, did I imagine this? Is she, because I've never come across that before in my life, where I've come across somebody that nobody seems to know who's fantastic. I thought, this is like, I had sort of my Lou Grey cigar in my mouth. Hey, I can make a fortune out of this, babe. Hey, But I thought, no, maybe I'm imagining it. Nobody seems to know her, and she's amazing. So we did the Park Hill thing, and it was the same reaction, like she's incredible. And then gradually, so I said, let's do a duo. So then I sort of set up doing the album, and which we launched here.
Obviously, talking about Vim, but who remained your heroes throughout your career? I mean, they've retained their heroic status. Or put it another way, when you go home tonight, what music are you going to play? What do you still listen to?
I think it's not that interesting, because to me it's the people you heard. I've got a great friend, Paul Meisberg, who's a scriptwriter, and we have breakfast. And when he was 17, he saw Vertigo, and that was it. And when I was 16, 17, when I was 15, I heard Django Reinhardt. When I was 12, I heard Hank Marvin. So Hank Marvin, and I got the old clip out. It was a film, it was the young ones, and I got out the clip, and it still made me go, and then Django, of course. And then when I saw Eric Clapton in Manor House, Finsbury Park in 1965, which was, I always like to emphasise this. This was completely the big bang of modern rock guitar. It was just astonishing, absolutely astonishing. He was 20 years old. It was just astonishing. You can't believe it's not the same person that you see now. So, so he remains not although I quite like some of the stuff he does now, but I mean, from that period, Jimmy, of course, but and MacLaughlin, who, there again, a lot of his later stuff, but those were the kind of formative heroes, really. And what I always wanted to do, and of course there were lots of people quietly working in this way in the late 60s, was to put the kind of Clapton thing with the jazz kind of thing, merging Clapton and Django Reinhardt. And that's why I like the way I play in the soft machine. If you said, what of your, what area of playing, and that I love, because that is where it came together for me, putting those things together. In a way, the Stephane Grappelli thing, you see, was a kind of diversion, but I just had to go with it. I had to go with that diversion, although I didn't consciously try and sound like Django. I played more or less the same as I played with the soft machine on acoustic guitar, and he loved it.
I remember talking to Stuart Hall, the great writer, and huge. And he was a huge fan of Miles Davis. He always used to say about Miles, and he'd grown up with Miles. Every time he felt he was getting the same. You said he's a bit boring in his life. The latest, Miles record would come out, and you listen to it, and you think, fucking hell, Miles is not standing still. Where's Miles going?
Miles, fantastic. Well, his playing always stayed pretty well the same, but he put it in different context. But finally, since you were saying that, I was thinking about Django Reinhardt. I mean, the other day I was listening to some, and everything about Django Reinhardt in the 30s. First of all, I was amazed by the technique. Then I was amazed by the tone. Then there's a sort of string bending and vibrato, the expressiveness. Then there was harmonic ideas. And the other day I was listening. Suddenly I was listening to his rhythm guitar, which is incredible. The rhythm guitar he plays behind Stephane is fantastic. It's absolutely... So it's a slightly similar thing, but not necessarily, these aren't new records, but in these great musicians, you hear different things. And I have to say, with early Clapton, I hear things. I go, timing, So that's inspiration. But of course I love all the newer players, they're old men now, John Scofield, Pat Metheny, and listening to them, I love to hear them. John Scofield, particularly, for me, is resonant for me because he's sort of not getting too involved in it. He's not fussy. His sound is not fussy. He's playing his improvisation. Improvisation for me is key.
We should have a last word about it. Last word is really about playing here, in the Vortex.
In the
Vortex.
I've seen you here so many times.
I know. Well, and the old Vortex, I actually started in the Vortex pretty well when it started. In fact, it was Dick Hextall-Smith, 1988. Dick and I were playing a duo every Sunday at the old Jazz Cafe in Stoke Newington. And then he said, there's a new club going on. We used to talk like that. Vortex, they want us to do a duo there. So started doing duos, and it was duos only, not in 1988, and then we got a license then. So I used to play probably 5 or 6 times a year at the Vortex, all the way through from 89, and then there was a brief moment where it was going to be in the Ocean in Hackney, and then it came here. And it's amazing how they built this space. It's brilliant, It is brilliant. It's been absolutely wonderful. Dave Mossman, of course, now there's Ollie and Kathy Ann and people running it, and it's always been very special to me, the Vortex. And I always used to notice it was one of the few gigs I used to turn up early to, because I sort of, just like to hang around a bit at the Vortex somehow.